Welcome to Inside Equine Minds, a podcast where I, Caitlin Hendry, meet with trainers, riders, and grooms to dive deep inside the minds of the most successful horses in various disciplines. We'll take you behind the scenes from the horse's perspective to learn about how these horses are trained and managed in a way that strengthens their mental game and fuels their success. This podcast is brought to you by EQPI, or Equine Performance Identities, which is a personality profiling tool to help you understand your horse at an individual level. An EQPI profile provides information about your horse's individual needs and motivations so you can manage and work with them in a way that brings out their best. An EQPI profile can also inform breeding and sales by providing information about temperament to ensure the best match possible between either horse and rider or stallion and mare. With the Olympics kicking off, I'm really excited to do a throwback to the 2020 Olympics. My guest today is Nick Wagman, who's joining me to talk about Don John, more lovingly known as DJ, who is a 2008 Dutch warmblood gelding owned by Beverly Gepfer, who Nick took as a traveling reserve for the U.S. Dressage team in 2021, I guess technically. But they had a lot of success before then. More notably, in 2019, Nick and DJ were part of the bronze medal winning team, the U.S. team, at the FEI Dressage Nations Cup in France. And Nick and DJ also won the USEF Grand Prix Dressage National Championship in 2019 at the Festival of Champions. Again, this all kind of culminated into being the traveling reserve for the U.S. Dressage team for the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo. And so I'm really excited to talk with Nick about DJ. And before we do, let's do a really quick overview of DJ's EQPI profile. In order to get DJ's EQPI profile, Nick went online and took the EQPI assessment on the website, which is www.equineperformanceidentities.com. It's about a 10-minute survey. Nick told me which behaviors he observed and how often, and using his input, I was able to create a personality profile for DJ. The EQPI profiles measure 4 spectrums of behavior. The first spectrum of behavior is independence, which is the horse's preference to control or comply. The second spectrum of behavior is extroversion, which is the horse's preference to interact or isolate. The third spectrum is the stability spectrum, which is the horse's preference for predictability or variety. And lastly, the fourth spectrum is the structure spectrum, which is the horse's preference for clarity or flexibility. By using Nick's inputs, I'm able to determine where on each of these spectrums does DJ fall. And in addition to looking at the individual spectrums, I also look at how the spectrums relate to each other, and this gives another layer of really understanding DJ's temperament. For the independent spectrum, DJ is considered very low. This is actually his strongest spectrum, meaning that it will influence his behavior the most. Horses who are on the low side of the independent spectrum tend to not have as much self-confidence. They tend to need more reassurance. They're more conflict averse, and they need a good, strong leader, not necessarily a heavy-handed leader because they are conflict averse, but an empathetic leader that's going to show them and reassure them and builds their confidence. The next spectrum we're looking at is the extroversion spectrum, and DJ is on the slightly high side, so not a super strong spectrum for him, but he will have some tendencies for maybe being more social or wanting to be liking attention, etc. His stability spectrum is situational, so this means that it's not really strong one way or another. So the way that we really understand how it's going to show up is by looking at how it relates to the other spectrums on DJ's profile. For example, it is lower than his high structure. And when horses have a stability spectrum that's lower than their structure spectrum, they're much more careful with rules. They like clarity. They want things to kind of be the same day in and day out. DJ also has a lower independence spectrum than his stability spectrum, and when we see this relationship in horses, they are a little bit more responsive instead of proactive, for example. So he may need a little bit more time to adjust to changes. He may need a little bit more time to warm up to new people. even though he is slightly high on that extroversion spectrum. The last spectrum we're going to look at is that structure spectrum, and DJ is on the high side for this. This is his second strongest spectrum compared to his independent spectrum. With high structure horses, they really like clarity. They really like things to be very black and white. They can be kind of picky and demand accuracy a bit more. And this is especially true because of that relationship between DJ's high structure and his very low independence. This is a very risk-averse horse, and so that clarity helps to mitigate that risk. Other notable relationships in DJ's profile between the spectrums includes his very low independence and his slightly high extroversion. That is a more other-oriented horse, and so he's going to want to be part of the group. He's going to really care about relationships and building relationships, but it might take him a little bit more time because of that situational stability and his high structure. He's going to care about trust a bit more, and so you're really going to have to earn it. Even though he really wants to, he's like, I don't know, we'll see. You'll have to prove it to me. If you want to see DJ's profile in more detail, it's available on the Inside Equine Minds Patreon account. Members have access to all of the guest horse profiles for free, or if you're not quite ready to be a member yet, you can still purchase individual profiles on Patreon as well. Patreon members also get discount codes for ECPI services and early access to the podcast content. Now that we all have the same basic understanding of DJ's profile, let's talk to our guest. Welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you've been working with DJ for a really long time, since he was 5 years old. So I'll start with, what aspect of his personality do you appreciate the most?
I would say the fact that he's so agreeable. He is truly a horse that is happy to do his job and go to work every day. That is something I look forward to with him. Again, having worked with so many different types of horses, he's very complicated in other ways, but in general, his willingness and his happiness and excitement about coming out of his stall every day just makes him a pleasure to be around.
Yeah, the low independence, that spectrum, that's his strongest spectrum, which means that it's going to influence his behavior the most. And with those low independence horses, we do see that agreeableness, and they're very sweet, and they are not necessarily social. It depends on the extroversion spectrum, which he is on the slightly high side. So I wouldn't be surprised if he is a little more social. But with those low independence horses, they are really team players. They want to please. They're more conflict averse. And so I can definitely see that in how it shows up, and just like wanting to be with you and be, a team player.
Yeah, he's a pleaser for sure.
Yeah. So then on the other side of that, which characteristic presents the biggest challenge for you?
I would say his lack of self-confidence, mixed with the fact that he's such a high energy sensitive horse, that has posed the most challenge, especially in his earlier days, developing him and getting him used to new experiences. Definitely something we had to take into consideration, because he was easily offended and easily, confidence in new situations if it wasn't handled with absolute certainty on our end, both through my groom and my vet and myself. So to get him to where he was confident going to something as grand as the Olympics was our biggest hurdle to overcome with him.
And what do you mean by offended? Like spooky, or was he grouchy?
No, never grouchy, but he would be, if someone did something too quick or didn't, I would always tell people he's such a sweet animal, and he wanted so much to be with his people. But if somebody new came along and didn't, I said, you always have to let him swallow your hand. You have to, no matter what. Every day to this day, I still have to let him just touch my hand with his nose, and then he lets me do anything. And if you don't do those little things with him, he just doesn't process it well, and then he gets a little bit standoffish.
Yeah. Yeah, he is also, his next highest spectrum is that high structure. And they are definitely high structure horses. Trust is a really big factor for them. And so even
Yes.
if they are higher extroversion like he is, you still need to build that trust with him. And in addition, because he is both high structure and low independence, which is where that low self confidence comes from, when we see that relationship between those two spectrums, they are very risk averse horses. So I
Yes.
think that's probably what we're seeing. Like, I mean, I'm social and I want to be part of the team, but you got to prove it first.
That's 100% spot on. Yeah.
I did read when I was doing some research for this. I found an article in Dressage Today from 2021. You mentioned having a couple significant falls on him when he was a younger horse. Can you tell me
hmm
a bit more about that?
That was truly related to girthiness,
Hmm.
and so that wasn't a training thing. Really, we found out literally the hard way that he is cold backed, and in tightening the girth, I took one step forward. The both circumstances I was hurt, it was exactly the same scenario, and so his response to whatever it is that a horse experiences when they feel that nerve or that claustrophobia from the girth, his response was enormous.
Hmm.
Whereas other girthy horses might give you a little bit of opportunity to get off, or they freeze, or they tighten their backs. His was, this hurts me, and his flight instinct took over immediately. So that's
So it wasn't him like pinning his ears and bucking. It was just like a kind of
Oh, it was it
response.
was it was like somebody took a branding iron and got him in his hind end, and he just exploded
Oh my
with no
gosh.
war with no warning at all. But that's my point with DJ. He would walk through fire with me if he's feeling comfortable, but the
Hmm.
second something out of the ordinary happened, his instinct was to just get the heck out of there.
Yeah, that risk aversion.
That risk aversion, yeah.
And then with he's not super high on extroversion, but high extroversion horses are also more expressive. And so I
hmm
find that when they are not feeling themselves or not quite comfortable, they really express it and they share that with you. It sounds like he takes that to the
Yes.
extreme because he's also has that risk averse relationship between his high structure and his low independence. He like takes that to the next level.
Totally, totally. And that's where I was coming into like and maybe that's one of your following questions, but the we after the first incident, we devised a way that because I had to feel comfortable getting on him every day. And so we devised a very regimented routine of what the steps were before I would mount him. And everybody involved knew that. And it went perfectly from then on out until at a horse show, somebody forgot one of the steps and it happened again. And so it was just again proof that the DJ needs his set routine and the set, parameters of what goes on. That's like this is how we do it. And if you stray from that, he knows you're straying from that immediately.
And it just like causes a breakdown.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He doesn't handle that variable that he wasn't expecting well.
Yeah, and I can see that in addition to that risk aversion, because his high structure is higher than his stability spectrum. When we see that relationship, it means they are more rule oriented, and so I can definitely see like we missed a step. Like no, 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 we have to go
Right.
back. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what other tips do you have? What other strategies would you suggest for working with DJ? Maybe we can start from a riding perspective and then make our way to kind of managing him around the barn or for shows.
On a daily basis, what makes DJ so wonderful in so many regards as a dressage horse for sure. He's a pleaser. So I mean, he learned everything really easily, and it was once I was able to manage his sensitivity and his lack of confidence in my day to day routine. I mean, he just jumped up the levels as quick as any horse I've ever had.
Mm.
So training with him was really just about health wise, finding the fitness level that he needed and just keeping it on a very, very regimented routine. I'm a very regimented person also. So that fit really well into my personality. So, yeah, getting from packing up to getting on to me riding him to cooling down and going back to get cleaned up. It was a very similar process every single day. And that really worked with him.
You've been riding him since he was 5, I think I read.
Correct. Correct.
So,
Yeah.
how did you approach the training where it just clicked so easily?
He just was open to all the new things that came along with moving up the levels. And with a lot of young horses, you learn very quickly they need variety, they need different changes of atmosphere or scenery. DJ just isn't one of those horses. And so,
Hmm.
and where DJ lives is at his owner's home, and so it's not this big barn with a lot of activity going on and a lot of other horses. He was often there with just one other horse in their backyard in the nice arena. He has a nice big paddock, but his life was really a lot of the times just in that smaller environment, and he really liked it. But I was always shocked that going to the shows and then all of a sudden going from this little bubble to this big new world, as long as we did everything that he was familiar with, he handled that really well without having to have much exposure to it prior to being there.
That is interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I do find the more I talk about personalities with people and their horses, those high structure horses, I've heard a number of professionals say at this point where if they're high structure, they just
Hmm.
follow the same routine at the show as they do at home. So that the horse is like, okay, I'm in a new environment, but we're doing the same things. We warm up the same way. Like, and so they have something to fall back on and build the confidence from in a new environment.
Absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough how important DJ's people are to him. When we started traveling all over the world, having Jose, his right hand man, who is just amazing, like be with him at every step possible. DJ just had the confidence to go do all of this. So yeah, he really taught me how willing a horse is as long as the trust is there. Because I think in the wrong hands or treated the wrong way or rushed, I just think DJ would have crumbled faced with all of the new challenges that becoming a top level equestrian athlete is, and the travel and the unfamiliar things you walk into. And so it's been a real fun process with him.
And were there certain things that Jose did to make DJ feel more comfortable at shows and traveling, or it was just sticking with that routine?
It was routine and also the amount of time that Jose and I spend with DJ. DJ really is our horse. And it's funny. And DJ's such a routine oriented horse. Jose has him ready, for me in the mornings. And then sometimes he walks him down to the arena, but while I'm still getting my boots on or whatnot. But DJ won't go down into the arena until I've pet him and I've given him one sugar cube. And we laugh. It doesn't matter how much we say no. He's like he will plant his feet. He demands a sugar cube. I give him one little sugar cube, and then he'll
And
walk
then
down to
he's
the ring
ready
and as
to
happy as a clam. Yeah,
go.
it's to that level of routine that DJ is used to. So
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
for as much as he's a product of his regimented schedule, I think one of our biggest aha moments with him and our breakthroughs in terms of confidence building was when we were actually in Europe, and there was a beautiful forest next to the stables we were at, and we started going on walks through the forest. And at first it was DJ was like, "Where the heck are you taking me? This is terrifying." And then
Yeah.
by the end, I was on a long rein and he was dragging me through the forest. And that really changed after that. I noticed his confidence level at big horse shows and big venues. And so that was something that I learned, that even though he blossomed and was doing so well, he did need for his own development something other than his bubble. But it only worked because I had access to it on a long-term basis, and I watched him go from being terrified to loving it. So,
Hmm.
in terms of getting his personality or dealing with a personality like that, that was a bit of information that I never thought about it until we just started talking about this so much. That was a pivotal point.
Because it just kind of stretched his bubble a little bit every day, or
I think it showed him that he was okay,
yeah,
and
you survived.
and and like I said, had someone said, "Okay, today you're going to walk through the forest from start to finish," he wouldn't have handled it well.
Hmm.
He wouldn't have anything bad, but it wouldn't have been an enjoyable experience for him. But the fact that we got to do a little bit and then a little bit more and then a little bit more, like I said, once he decided it was okay and fun, he loved it. And then we ran into deer, and sometimes we got lost in the forest, and I was like, I don't even know where I am. And it didn't matter. And then
Yeah.
it just changed the prize giving ceremonies. Those were a huge issue for him. And like I just felt him get better in those. And so,
What was an issue about them?
oh, the energy from the other horses. If the other horses started to act up, that meant fear for him.
Hmm.
He was fine walking in. He would stand there. They would listen to the national anthem. But then as soon as that honor lap music turned on and horses started to spin or twirl, I mean, it was kind of like when I had the girth too tight. He was like, "Get me out of here." It was really a hard thing for him to contend with.
So what did you end up doing? You just took him on these walks in the forest and then he got better?
No, no, no. But after that, there was a noticeable difference. But Jose led me into every single honor round.
Hmm.
He stood there with him, and then we would play it by ear. If it was a calm enough thing, I would do the lap of honor. Otherwise, we would excuse ourselves and
Mm.
take him out of that so that he never got to that point where it was that upsetting to him.
Yeah, that's really nice that you did that because I feel like a lot of people would feel the pressure to do the ride around the arena, and it's nice that you would listen to him.
I'm adamant about that. And I think you really talk to a lot of riders, they would all agree that that is a real unfortunate thing that somehow we've subjected these horses to, that they have to race around and deal with this screaming and clapping. And it's a tough thing for most horses. And then to have to go back into that same arena the next day and walk
Yeah.
and not remember what they just did,
All the
a few hours
trauma.
before.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's a rare horse that doesn't get impacted by that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure through exposure and you can get most horses better at it, but it's I don't think any horse likes that.
Yeah. And maybe you can confirm or deny this, but I feel like a lot of these really upper level dressage horses are these more sensitive, high structure horses. And that's kind of what makes them so good is that they're careful and you don't have to be kicking every
Right.
stride to keep them going. But then, yeah, like you put them in an arena full of people clapping and cheering, like those two things like do not really go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I watch some of the really top riders now in these big stadiums, and those very few horses, they tolerate it. And I'm like, I would love to know what went into getting that high strong, hot, sensitive horse to get to the point where they could handle that. As a rider, that would be, I think, very, very important to me. I would love to pick other top level riders at that level and see what did you go through? How did you get to that point? DJ definitely is not one of those horses that I think would ever go through a stadium with 10,000 people cheering. That was one of my concerns at the Olympics. And I was the alternate, so I didn't compete, but it was also during COVID. So there was very few people there there were no spectators there. So very different atmosphere riding in that arena without people in it as opposed to with people in it.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, DJ's super successful in dressage, right? He's been to the Olympics.
Mhm.
You've won multiple Grand Prix on him. How do you think his personality factored into that?
I think two things. I think the fact that he enjoys his work. I think dressage really is the right discipline. He's very suited to being a dressage horse. One, because he finds the work so easy, and mentally because I think he's such a willing participant, that there wasn't a lot of drilling that had to go into getting him ready for a show. We didn't have to ramp up the training intensely to get him ready. So because everything stayed the same, to be able to perform the Grand Prix test every time we needed to do it, it wasn't this extreme thing that we had to all of a sudden go try to do. I don't know how to put it in a way. I think because he just found the work so easy, it allowed me to go to these shows and maintain a very familiar situation for him.
Hmm.
Our biggest struggle was physically. He had uneven feet, and that plagued his right front leg, and we just always battled little tiny injuries that got the better of us. But it had nothing to do with his personality or his willingness to be a dressage horse at all.
Yeah, I mean, he's so rule oriented that I would imagine once you trained him to do something, well, tell me if this is right or wrong, but I would imagine
Mhm.
once you trained it, there wasn't a whole lot of touching up that needed to be done. Like once he knew it was expected of him, he would just he knew the job.
He knew the job, and in working with the coaches that I worked with, they a lot of them were like, okay, we got a show coming up. I need to do the test. And I kept saying, I don't need to do the test. Or for example, I never did the one time changes in my warm up, and it would drive my coaches nuts. I'm like, you guys, you have to trust me. I do the twos and we don't touch the ones. He knows the ones, but if I do the ones in the show, he's going to be thinking one. And that's exactly, how you develop that relationship with the top level coaches, is because you do know your horse so well and you do know what they need. Drilling him or making him go through the patterns excessively did not help his, because then he knew something was different and he started getting worried about it.
So you almost had to catch him off guard.
I wouldn't say catch him off guard. Is this like in my day-to-day training, I would do a little segment from the Grand Prix every once in a while, so he was familiar with the geometry, and he knew if we did a half pass right steeply, then there would be a left one coming up. But I didn't do it regularly, and I didn't feel the need to ramp that up coming into a horse show, and certainly not in the warm up of the day of a competition.
Because he would just start to anticipate.
He would start to anticipate, and if his body and his mind and all of the familiarity of our basic training was there. The warm up was about suppleness, about making sure he wasn't too hot, about making sure he was feeling good left and right, touching on little things here and there. It wasn't about the actual test. And a lot of horses need that. I have other horses where I have to ride the actual lines of the test leading a week or two up to the show so that it doesn't surprise them when we do it in the show arena.
Mm-hmm.
He just wasn't one of those horses.
That's really interesting to hear. I love hearing all the stories like that. So I was looking into his breeding a little bit. He is by Johnson out of Linda Lee, who's by Good
Yeah,
Times.
correct.
Are you familiar with like Johnson or Linda Lee personally? Have you ever met them?
I have not met either personally. I have worked with several other Johnson offsprings, and I also have worked with another one or two Good Times. So, but I do not know the actual sire and the dam. Mm-mm.
Did you find any similarities across the offspring?
Physically, yes. The several Johnsons that I work with, they look similar to DJ, but I think the Good Times influenced him in a way that I can see is different than the other Johnsons that I've worked with.
Yeah, I'm asking these questions because I'm sort of getting to the nature versus nurture discussion when it comes to personality. Do you feel that heredity or upbringing play a bigger role in shaping personality?
Oh gosh, I think that's like the chicken or the egg question. That's really a big one because they obviously they have personalities innately in them. I am not a breeder. So I don't have a lot of experience with horses as foals, so I don't know what goes into and how much the human or the nurture aspect of them in the early stages of development. All I know is that horses that are treated incorrectly, I don't necessarily mean that in an abusive way, but I watch a lot of people not pay attention to the horses correctly or think the horses need to fit into a certain mold. You start seeing consequences from that, and that does impact their personalities. So I think really both are probably very strong players in this. I don't know. I'd have to really think about which was a bigger influence. I know that if we didn't, for example, with DJ, pay attention to what he was telling us, it would have gone in a very different direction. And I think that falls solely on the nurture aspect of it.
It could have just spiraled and gotten
He
worse.
would have lost his trust. He would never have done what he's done. So this is probably a very good example. After my accident, I of course became a much more timid rider on him for a while, and he never showed me any signs of that bothering him until we started going to horse shows. And all of a sudden, he started getting very nervous about other horses coming towards him in the arena, in the warm-up arena, which he had never done. I realized
Mm.
it was my apprehension that he was picking up on. And so within a matter of weeks, I changed something completely in his personality that had not been there before, or his behavior
Yeah,
that had not been there
right.
before.
The behavior. Yeah, because I think with that low independence, because like you said, they don't have that self-confidence to
Right.
carry them through that, they're really relying on the horses and the people around them to kind of help in those scenarios when they're not as confident. And so
Hmm.
I think he was like, if you're not sure, why are we not sure? Like, why do I need to be nervous right now?
Right. Absolutely.
I mean, I think that's probably the case for a lot of horses, but there are some that are just much higher on the higher independence spectrum where they're fine taking the lead. They're like, yeah, cool, I'll take it, I'll do it, I got you. Um,
Yeah, they take advantage, right? If you lose your confidence, then the horse sometimes misbehaves and is like, okay, they try to get out of work. DJ was more like, gosh, you're scared, I'm going to be scared.
yeah.
And I'm just using it as examples for how influenced they are by their surrounding or their people or they're getting a lot of their information as domesticated animals from the people handling them.
Hmm. So you keep saying hot and sensitive.
Hmm.
And I want to dig into that for a little bit because I'm curious what your perspective is. For me, I picture hot and sensitive as being associated with two different spectrums. So
Hmm.
the sensitivity and like sensitivity to aids and new environments and that anxiety if you're asking them to do something that they don't know how to do or in an unfamiliar environment or you change the routine, that kind of sensitivity I think is associated with high structure. The hotness as far as the energy for me is I interpret that as being associated with low stability and DJ's situational stability. And so I'm curious if there were instances where maybe he was sensitive but not hot, or I guess I just want to dig into that a little bit more because
Sure.
I just hear you keep grouping those together. So I'm curious what your perspective is.
Yeah, and maybe that's just, something that we have just gotten used to saying, oh, they're hot and sensitive. I agree with you. When I say hot, I am referring much more to the energy. And in my opinion, he's a high energy horse. One as a young horse where he needed to be lunged for sure. But then at a horse show, the first day on the lunge, he was just breathing fire. And so there was that hot. He needed a longer warm up in terms of getting the energy to a point where his energy didn't get the better of him and he was able to relax in the test itself. The sensitivity comes from, yes, he's very affected by the little things. It takes very little physical effort to get an aid to come through on him. He's a very sensitive horse when it comes to the environment, or if another horse was acting up, he'd pick up on that energy. So yes, they're two different things, but with him they go hand in hand.
You said you still lunged him at home because that was part of his routine, right?
Yes, and then as he got older, then it turned into we just had to jog him up and down a couple times the length of the arena. It was just to make sure at home that the girthiness was not there. So yes, as he got older and more aware and he became more familiar with the routine, no, I didn't have to lunge him like I did as a 5 or 6 or a 7-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
But that was definitely certainly my first trip to Europe, for example, where we did big things. It was one of the first things I asked, the chef to keep. I'm like, these venues that you're taking us to, like there has to be a safe place for me to twirl him around a couple laps because I won't be able to get on him safely. And that was something we really had to take into consideration. So
Mm.
as a sensitive horse, those are the kind of things that I was facing.
And did you lunge for a long time, or was it just, just to let him get his nerves out?
As a young horse on the first day of a show, if I let him tear around, he would just wind himself up more and more. So
Mm.
it was a lot of, and he got to the point where he knew he was like, please let me buck and twirl and do my thing. And I was like, DJ, you can't. And I would stop him when we would walk and then I trot him again. So it was a lot of me helping him learn to cope with that
To
hotness.
regulate. Yeah.
Yes, he really had to learn how to regulate it. As an older horse and a seasoned horse, we got past that. I didn't need to do the lunging part of it. It really was, hey, we're here. He knew why we were there. And as long as I jogged him up and down a few times.
If you ever gave him a couple days off, what was your next ride like?
So at home, I would often be gone for the weekends giving clinics or whatnot. And then so on Monday, earlier on in his younger years, yeah, I would definitely put him on the lunge line and he would be fresh. But 2 days as an older horse, I felt pretty good. We just kept the jogging down. We just did our jogging.
Yeah.
It also would depend on weather and whatnot, what was allowed to happen on the 2 days that I wasn't there. If he was cooped up because of bad weather, then yes, that was a different situation. But on a
Mm-hmm.
normal day, and as long as he got his normal walking in and time in the paddock, I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah.
And he felt pretty good about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for diving in. It's just with the situational stability, I was curious kind of where that was showing up. That's why I was asking all of those questions, because definitely with the high structure being higher than his stability spectrum, I can see like they do much better kind of in a program and with the rules and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just curious how that showed up in an energy capacity. Well, thank you
Yeah.
so much again for joining me.
You're welcome. It's fascinating, and talking about it and reading it does make you think about things in a more concrete way. Whereas, as I've been doing this for so long, you just kind of learn as you go along about each horse individually, and then put that in your back pocket if you have another horse with similar issues or strengths or weaknesses. But to actually have it in writing and a system that you could go back to and reference is really quite helpful, I think.
If you want to know your horse's profile, you can get a profile at the EQPI website, which is www.equineperformanceidentities.com. If you like this podcast, we'd really appreciate if you showed us some love by giving us a rating on whatever listening platform you use. And if you know anyone who would like this particular episode, please share this episode with them as well. Thanks for listening, and we hope you tune in next time.